I'm currently a city council member here in Morehead, and I tell people that it's my favorite job ever. I taught at Morehead State University for 35 years. Really enjoyed that a lot. I love being in the schools. Still today, I go out to Round County schools and I help them in ways that I can. But being a council member and meeting with the people in the community and listening to what their thoughts are, what their desires are for our community, what challenges we have, is my favorite thing. And I try to take all of those ideas back to council. Sometimes they sit in the back of my head for a while, but there's always a time for something like what people say to come up, and I try to connect those dots for people. But I'm here today to introduce our speaker, our leader, our facilitator of the panel. This is Sarah M. Schmitt, and she has been the Kentucky Arts Council Executive Director, Arts Council's Executive Staff Advisor since January 2024. She previously served as the Arts Organization and Access Director, the Administrator of the Kentucky Oral History Commission, the Community Arts and Access Director for the Kentucky Arts Council, and as a folk life specialist for the Kentucky Folk Life Program. What a resume. Thank you. She is founding member of the Kentucky Rural Urban Exchange Steering Committee. Thank you for that, too. We love having you all in our community, and come back. You don't have to be here on an organized mission. Sarah holds a bachelor's degree in anthropology and history and a master's degree in folk studies. She specializes in documenting and telling the story of Kentucky's unique cultural landscape, highlighting the valuable role that arts play in the Commonwealth, and using strategies to expand participation, access, and inclusion in the arts for all Kentuckians. Sarah seeks to uplift the vibrant culture of the Commonwealth's people through empathic, bold, and clever practices. I like that, clever practices. That's good. More importantly, she wants to connect with people who are proud to call Kentucky home. That's us. She lives in Lexington with her partner, son, and Chihuahua, and she enjoys tales of the supernatural, exploring Kentucky, and drinking coffee with new and interesting people in the places they love. Sarah M. Schmitt.
I'm going to invite all of our presenters to come up here and sit with me. And I have a Britney Spears microphone on my head right now. And then this is sort of the spirit stick. And as this is a facilitated conversation, so I'll make sure that when I have a question that's pointed towards you, that you have the spirit stick. So let me pull up my notes real quick. Would you hold the spirit stick? Thank you. And I must say, that bio, I just realized as she was reading, that is not something that I could have put together myself before Rux, being able to say nice things about myself that way. So, well, thank you for joining us today for Kentucky Rux Narrative Stage. If you're not part of the Rux cohort, thank you for hosting us in your community, and we welcome you here to be with us, and we hope that you've already sat down and broke bread with folks, and we hope you got to know some new people. And we hail from more than 24 counties across Kentucky, and we've gathered because we believe that if Kentuckians do come together across the state and across all of these lines that divide us, that we can solve our own problems, and we can shape a future that we want for our kids, our future, and just being good ancestors to people, frankly. And the Kentucky Arts Council, which is where I work, we have been investing in this program for more than a decade now. I know I said that last night because we believe that art is a way of addressing healing in communities. And as famous Kentuckian bell hook said, rarely, if ever, are any of us healed in isolation. Healing is an act of communion. And I think that's why a lot of us came to this group, was because we value connection in that way. And most importantly, we believe that Kentuckians' lived experiences, you've heard that a lot this weekend too, are our best guide and our best teacher when we're trying to affect change. Like, what are people doing that is working, essentially? And what do the people who are most affected by it have to say about the solutions? Again, I work for a state government agency, so I couldn't come here and not talk about what being part of Team Kentucky. In our new Kentucky home, Governor Beshear has prioritized combining the opioid epidemic, or combating rather, the opioid epidemic through prevention, treatment expansion, and aggressive lawsuits against pharmaceutical manufacturers throughout both of his terms as governor and also even in his previous role as Attorney General. Addressing the opioid crisis is perennially part of the governor's Team Kentucky updates, if you see those on YouTube, and where he has reported that the Commonwealth has funded tens of thousands of addiction treatment and recovery services, certified more than 40 Kentucky counties as recovery-ready communities, and it may be more than that now. Okay. And distributed hundreds and thousands of naloxone kits and created online tools to connect individuals with resources such as Find Recovery Housing Now Kentucky and Second Chance. And the result is that drug overdose deaths in Kentucky have been declining for 4 consecutive years now. But we all know there's still work, right? And this has come up quite a bit this weekend among this group and some folks I've talked to in the cohort. The Kentucky Center for Economic Policy recently, I guess at the end of June, published a report that indicated that local governments have only spent about 10% of the opioid settlement dollars and abatement monies. And even within that spending, the center determined, based on a national roadmap for spending opioid settlement funds, that a concerning portion of those dollars that were spent were deemed problematic in some way. So the message that I took from that was not a condemnation of individual counties, regardless of what their angle was, but more a call to bring everyone into good spending through sharing best practices, successful models, and listening to those folks who are most deeply affected. So I try to come to those things in good faith rather than condemnation, because just like a personal recovery journey is not linear, I'm sure a community's recovery journey is not linear, and it can be fraught for so many different reasons that are unique and some that they all share in common, and we'll get into some of those things here. I am happy to report that those communities that are using a hub-like model were touted as good spending, and Rowan County definitely got a positive mention within that report. And so in Ruck's fashion this afternoon, we're going to look to people with lived experience, the 4 folks here that are working in this region, to see what we can take home and share with our friends, our neighbors, and most importantly, our policymakers about how to address this crisis and to spend this money and get it working effectively in our communities. And I want to acknowledge that this is not an easy conversation to have with an open heart. I doubt there's a person in this space that has not been personally, if not very deeply, impacted by this crisis. I'm sorry, this is not my conversation to be getting choked up at. But, and I want us all to remember that we come in good faith, that these folks are here, they're giving us our time, and I want you to hold their stories. And I want you to handle yourself with care as needed, too. So, unfortunately, I can't leave the stage and excuse myself, but if you need to, do so as called. So it's now my pleasure to present today's speakers. I've had a chance to talk with all of them. They are so open and sharing of their stories. I really appreciate it. And we have with us Logan Barker, who's the co-founder of Dolorosa Recovery. We have Melinda Fugate, who is with Pathways Outpatient, and I noticed their building's just right down the street here, so she's like the localist of local in terms of affiliation. We have Kristin Tiedeman, who works with organizations to develop and sustain recovery housing and support services in rural communities with the Fletcher Group. And we have Gene Detherage, a recovery specialist with the Bluegrass Area Development District, and many other things. You all hold many hats. I just pulled out the big top topic. And the first question I have for you, I always like for folks to be able to introduce themselves and tell you about who they are from their perspective. And I'm going to ask everybody, we'll just pass the mic on down the line, if you will share with me how you came to this work.
My name's Logan Barker. Thank you all for having us. It's pretty cool. I got to share some stories down there at the when we broke bread, and it was kind of neat to see the commonalities between everybody, whether it was music, food, taste, things like that. It's a neat thing you guys got going on here. Much different and better than I expected. But also, congratulations. Gene has 12 years today, free of any substances. I'm up here with some real heavy hitters today, so it's like I'm real encouraged by that, and I'm very appreciative of that, and for you all to be able to listen to us. So how I got into this is I was raised great, right? Model father, mentor. He was our scoutmaster. He was a federal agent. He led the FBI in Kentucky. He was at Waco, worked the mafia, all these cool things, right? But he was also the guy who would drive a extremely old car, very modest fashion. He taught me what humility was and constantly quoted John Maxwell at me and says, "A humble man never says he's humble." I learned what it was to be a man, right? I never got in. I played baseball. I did all the things that a all-American kid should be doing. I had a great childhood. I had a therapist one time. She was like, because she was talking about revealing your trauma. And I said, I don't have none. She was like, well, you use drugs, so you have trauma through that. And she said, let's talk about that. And so whenever I would talk about that, I get to exemplify what my father taught me now as how to be a man, how to be a father, how to have manners, how to respect women, how to show up for the people in your life. Well, I started using drugs around 2021, drinking, obviously going all the way down the road, spent 10 years abusing my body through any form and fashion that I could because I wanted to wear that mask. I wasn't happy with who I was. And so that was my way to cover up, to hide from everyone else the true feelings of who I was or what I was going through. And I got to cover up my identity because through a substance. And it started with prescription pain medication because I'm a very fast-speaking, wired guy that runs all the time doing everything, and it calmed me down. So it self-medicated me in a way, and that's how the therapists and stuff would justify it. They'll be like, oh, well, you're self-medicating. It's okay. This is why you do that. And the whole time I held to no, I made terrible decisions. I knew better, and I should have done better. But I got caught in the grasp, and, within 2-3 months of partying and having fun in college and experimenting with all these things and then keep experimenting, I wake up sick and somebody was like, you're dope sick. And for any of you that don't know what that's like, has anybody had COVID in here? Yeah, a couple, right? It's awful. Okay, so now imagine, I don't know, $25, you don't feel bad no more. $50, you don't feel bad no more. I found a way to get the $50, all those things and hurting my family or pawning everything I own and going through that. Even though, remember, as I told you, I had 20 years of being raised right and all the good things, I took it too far and diverted. And in that time, I found a lot of people, because I never lost my heart. I had a huge heart even through addiction. It was okay, well, I'll take care of us. You didn't have this growing up or this and that. I'll use everything that I have so that we can do this. And at some point it gets selfish too, but when I went through multiple facilities, and the last time, I can't tell you what clicked. It was just time to grow up. And luckily, I lived long enough for that to happen, as so many people who don't. So I went through a treatment center again, and at that point, it was hey, they're happy. What are they doing? Are they using some gas station drug? Are they smoking weed still? Are they drinking? Where's the loophole? Because there's a loophole for people to be who they are, not wearing a mask, and feel this good still and be happy and smiling. And I realized there wasn't one. And so as that progressed and came about, I was like, I want to start a treatment center. But I really wasn't. The Via Dolorosa is an inpatient, day one clean facility. But that wasn't my goal. My goal was kind of what Kristin and Gene had focused on a lot in residential housing after you get that. How do we sustain that? Cool, you can go to a treatment center and sit and be guarded and have walls up and not be able to go anywhere and not use drugs. But how do we integrate that into the community? Because I was taught that as a kid, right? And so I saw so many people that 80-90% of the rooms, they didn't have a father. They didn't have a mentor. They didn't have someone to guide them. And my convictions were just, I felt so guilty. And for years I battled that. And finally somebody was like, what, you're guilty for being born? Like you were born into an example and somebody wasn't, you're wearing that guilt. How about like just take that and how about show somebody? And so like that was the mission. Like I just wanted to help people in that area be able to grow up. What does it look like to be a man? And there's so many different paths to that. It's not AA or NA or church or this group or that group or CR. There's not one fix-all, which a lot of the times in recovery previously throughout the years, it's been like, this is the program, this is it, this is the only way that you won't use drugs again. And that's not the case. There's so many different spots for that person, and the answer is exactly what you guys have here, community. You have mutual people who you can walk through life with and understand some of your dilemmas, understand how to take the mask off, and you're comfortable enough to communicate that with. I remember somebody telling a story, and it was like talking about shampoo, going through an aisle and not knowing what kind of shampoo to buy, and they about had an anxiety attack because they hadn't bought shampoo because they'd used drugs for so long. It was just grab whatever. And now you look and you're really paying attention, and there's 100 different types to buy. Which one's natural? Which one's organic? Which one actually is natural? Which one's not just labeled, you know? And I found myself in the shampoo aisle at Walmart making a phone call to somebody and being like, dude, what shampoo do I buy? You know? But I was comfortable enough with somebody because I had open and honest communication to find out that, like, I can call them and they're not going to make fun of me because they've been in the same spot as me and they can relate. So that was kind of how I came into it and what I wanted to develop to help. And the answer to a lot of it's community and honesty and openness and acceptance, you know. So thank you.
Hi guys, my name is Melinda. I am from this area. I'm going to say I grew up in a family where drinking was normal. We raised backer. I was raised on a farm. Everybody drank. It was normal. I took my first drink probably around the age of 9. Nobody thought anything about it. They thought it was funny. The kids were over here drunk in the corner. As I got older, got into my teenage years, you know, I hung out with people who was drinking, who was using substances and stuff. And slowly I started started out with marijuana. And then somebody would introduce, hey, try this. It'll make you feel really good. And I tried that. By the age of 16, I'd already been incarcerated. I've been incarcerated multiple times since the age of 16. I was real rebellious. Nobody could do anything with me. I was a very hurt child. I didn't belong anywhere that I was except unless I was under the influence or unless I was drunk. As I got older, the first time they sent me to treatment, I went to a treatment and I returned back home. There was no such thing as meetings in this area at that time. There was nobody in recovery. Everybody still looked down on people who used substances and stuff like it was something bad. I got right back into what I know, the only people that I knew, and that's, back into the bars and doing the things that I'd done. I continued for many years there, in and out of jails, in and out of institutions, in and out of treatment centers with no help. In 2016, I caught some pretty significant charges, and they sent me to Richmond, which had a really good recovery community. And this was the first time that anybody had shared lived experience with me who had shown me a different way of life and that I could do a different way of life, who gave me the ability to see that I could do something different and to believe in myself. I stayed there for a couple of years and kind of got a firm foundation underneath of me, kind of got a job, kind of saved money, kind of got where I could take care of myself. My mother, I had 3 children along the way on this, and my mother spent more time raising my children than I did. In 2020, I made the choice to come back into this area, in which at this time, the community and stuff here had changed tremendously. People were more accepting. People were more willing to give you jobs because of your criminal charges or because you had an addiction problem. I started out as peer support. I became a registered alcohol and drug peer support specialist. I was asked if I would work with incarcerated individuals. And that was a big blessing to me. I remember what it felt like sitting there inside that jail and felt like nobody cared or nobody wanted nothing to do with me or nobody believed in me. When I get to walk in these jails, sometimes I am the only hope that some of these people see. And I get the ability and stuff to help them to kind of transition back out into society, to have somebody there to guide them, to show them what kind of shampoo works, to help them pick out clothes, to help them find stable housing, help them find jobs, to help them build resumes, whatever this individual needs to kind of get back on their feet to be successful at their recovery. You know, since being in my recovery, I've been able to obtain my BSW, and I'm currently working on my MSW. You know, the only way that I was able to do that was from community and support. Because without them, like, I could not break the cycle myself. You know, I wanted out of this cycle so bad when I was in this addiction. I attempted suicide 3 different times because I did not see a way out.
Hi, I'm Kristin. Wow. So thank you guys for being here, and thank you for opening your hearts and your minds to this topic, which is not always an easy topic to discuss. It's funny, I'm very comfortable in my fellowship speaking, you know, about my disease. I'm very comfortable when I'm sharing with people with other lived experience, and now I'm in front of people that not necessarily have that lived experience, and I'm like, wow, I don't know what to say. I got started, you know, like, you know, stories are similar. I was raised, grew up in a family. My dad was a executive for AT&T, and we had a great life. You know, I was raised well. We had, in my family, I didn't have the trauma that a lot of people have, kind of like Logan was talking about. I had great parents. I had great examples, 3 sisters. Life was great, except it wasn't, you know? And that was the thing, is that and Logan referred to this, I just didn't feel okay. Right? I was different. I didn't fit in. I never felt enough. My whole goal was to win my dad's approval, be number 1, and it was always a competition. Now, I think differently. You know, one of the things that the more you learn about substance use disorder is that we're different, right? People with substance use disorder, our brains work differently, our bodies are different, we react different. I have 3 sisters. If you talk to them about the family they grew up in, they grew up in a totally different family than I did, because my perception was just different, right? Anyways, I had an older sister, and she experimented with substances, and so at the age of 10, I began using substances, and it was just it was just experimenting, but experimenting led to, at 13, I was I was drinking and other substances every day. And that kind of continued. And you don't need to know the details, right? For 40 years, I put substances in my body, and that was in any fashion that you can imagine. That's what I did, okay? And while I was doing that, I was working at the university. I was advisor for social work. I was Gene's advisor, okay? You know, and I'd be high. And he'd come in talking about recovery, and I'd be like, God, get the hell out of my office. Because nobody knows can identify somebody that's high better than somebody who's been there. And I'm like, he's going to know, and he would be all cheery, and I'd be like, oh. Anyways, while I was, I had a very good chemist. I was, I considered myself a chemist, and I would have what I needed in my pocket to get me through the day so that I could get work done, so that I could be soccer mom and run concessions and do all of the things that I had to do to be as a mother, right? Until I could get home and I could drink and I could do my other stuff, right? And then I'd lock myself in my bathroom and take care of myself for the night, right? I'm the person, and I share this only because people that are coming, out of active addiction come into their recovery community with lots of guilt and shame and those kinds of things, right? Trauma comes. I didn't have trauma from my family, but when at 13, when I'm using every day, I'm making bad decisions and I'm making high-risk decisions, and trauma occurs, right? And trauma occurs for the next 30 years, 40 years. And one of, I was, during my pregnancy, while I was nursing, all of those things I was using. And I would cry. And I would be like, God, I just can't, I just don't want to do this. But you know what? Anybody here that thinks that it's a choice, please reconsider your thoughts, okay? Because I had no choice. I just had to do what I had to do, and I had to do what I had to do. I mean, that was all there was to it. And so I walk into these rooms, and I am filled with guilt of the kind of mom that I had been, the kind of employee I had been, all of those things. My son, so how did I get to here is when my son was a junior in high school, he walked into my bedroom, and he said, I'm moving out. I need a healthier place to live. And thank God he had the ability as a damn teenager to be able to do that, because he was not in a healthy environment. He did not need to be there. His best friend's parents were outside waiting on him, and he moved in. And I was mad, because I was like, how dare you judge me? Well, what he walked into was squalor. It was not, I was working at the university. I was advising people. I was not able to function. It was ugly, it was dark, it was, So I went and got help, and I went to detox, and I had private insurance. And my insurance after 5 days said, you're cured, go home, okay? And as soon as I was able to stop shaking enough to pass that test. And at the time in Morehead, there wasn't, there wasn't recovery housing. There wasn't, MIC was here, and that was the only bit of recovery that we had, okay? And my husband was in active addiction, and I came back home because I had nowhere else to go. I had no money. You don't end up, that was my only option. I found a community in the fellowship that I began going to, a 12-step fellowship. Gene was the first person to give me a hug when I walked into the rooms. And, I was almost dead, and now I'm not. And that's the thing, right, is that the people in that fellowship loved me back to life. I learned how to live, and I do it still every day, because I had never lived without having substances in me. So I didn't know how to parent. I didn't know how to go grocery shopping. I didn't know how to clean my house. First time I cleaned my house, I started bawling because I didn't know how to do it without putting something in me, because I had never done that before. So I'm still working at the university. I'm finally sober, and all of a sudden I'm like, wow, this life's not bad. But part of recovery is giving back. And so one of the professors in the social work program came to me and approached me about a job. A local organization had received a BJA reentry grant and asked if I would be interested in applying to be the program director. And so I went for the interview, and for the first time in my life, I was hired because I had 40 years experience as an addict, right? I was like, hell yeah. this is pretty cool, you know? I mean, how amazing is that, right? And so I got to build this program where we would work with individuals 6 months to a year prior to them getting out of the jail here in the detention center, and then we met them at the door with clothes, with ID, with a place to stay, with everything that they, not everything, you know, but with a plan and support. And I was, you know, I would take them to the dollar store, and, you know, because if they're moving into recovery housing, the last thing you want to do is move in and not have food, right? And have to walk in and be asking for noodles. You know, that's just, you just came out of jail. That's not what you know, what needs to happen. And I'd be like, okay, what do you want? I don't know. You know, jail you lose your ability to make decisions because that's you know, in order to keep things in order at a jail, you can't have a lot of people making a lot of different decisions. It has to be, here's how things are done, and you're told what to do. And so then you lose the ability to make those decisions. So I ran that program for 3.5 years, and it was it's the best job I've ever had until I got this job with the Fletcher Group. So I loved that. I was not great. The only part I wasn't great at is I had no boundaries, because my fellowship, if the phone rang, you answered it and you helped people. That was what you were supposed to do. As a CADC and as the project director, that's not what I was supposed to do, but that's what I did, and I got called out on it a lot. And I was finally like, okay, this is just not what I'm supposed to do, because I'm there to help. And so the Fletcher Group, I help people. And I get to work all over the United States in rural communities to help expand the recovery ecosystem, you know, and that could be anywhere from helping develop recovery housing, start up a new house. I've got a project in Virginia where we're building a recovery campus, you know, and I'm like doing things that I've never, like project management stuff, like we're worried about low-income housing tax credits and new market tax. I'm like, what the hell? I don't know anything about this stuff, right? But I get to learn how to do this stuff, and people trust me to do that, right? And it's the coolest thing in the world. So that's how I am. You know, to me, having to come home and having no resources really helped me to want to, and then with the reentry program, to get into work that was going to help people not have to do that, right? And today I'm a big part of recovery community center called Recovery Brown County, and we're that hub where people can come in any level, any place, in recovery, not in recovery, does not matter, just come. And we help you get connected to what you need to be connected to. And for the first time in my life, when I walked into that first 12-step meeting, for the first time in my life, I felt like I was a part of something. And today I get to grow that every day.
My name's Gene Detherage. I'm a person committed to long-term recovery since July 18th of 2014. Sixth-generation Appalachian Kentuckian. It's a whole graveyard of Detherages in a place used to be called KJ, down on the edge of Knox County, just past a little place called Artemis, depending on where you're from. And there's a lot of dead Detherage men in that cemetery, most of them pretty young. And, you know, for me, my story did have quite a bit of trauma. My mother developed really acute, treatment-resistant, severe mental illness around the time I was 5 or 6 years old, paranoid schizophrenia. It was very frightening as a child. And, you know, she attempted somewhat to self-medicate with alcohol. And my brother and I, we lived, I grew up in Harrodsburg, but I went to high school in Knox County. But right before I started high school, my brother and I went down to live with my dad. You know, they had been divorced for some time. And I thought that would be an easier, softer journey, but it turned out, he and Grandma both were in the late stages of alcoholism. He was up to about a fifth of whiskey or vodka a day, and Grandma was right behind him. And so, there was a lot of interpersonal violence and turmoil in the home. And then, for me personally, when I was in school, the main thing they taught us was you got to resist the peer pressure. So y'all might remember that. And so anyway, a lot like Kristin was saying, our brains work a little bit differently. I figured if I found somebody and intentionally tried substances for the first time, I would have successfully, navigated around the whole peer pressure problem. And then, when I consumed substances for the first time, in my conscious life, I felt okay with who I was and who you were and all the things that were going on in the world. And I had one of the most clearly articulated thoughts I've ever had in my life in that moment. I said to myself, I will never be without this feeling again. And so for the next 7 or 8 years, I dedicated every ounce of money, talent, ability, everything that I had to making sure that that was true in my life. Using daily, drinking daily. And, there's plenty of horror story in there. And then the summer after high school, I was just kind of adrift. There was a wonderful woman that worked with, there was a state program, I think it's still around, I think it's called TRIO. She worked for them down in Corbin, Cherie St. Louis Smith. And she looked at me, and she told me that I should go to college. I wanted to join the Air Force and was talking with a recruiter, but then, I decided, well, what I told myself was that I'd never actually wanted to do that. But what the truth was is that I couldn't stop consuming drugs long enough, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to go and, pass the urinalysis screening to be able to join the military. So anyway, Cherie recommended that I go to school because, my test scores weren't too bad. And that's how I ended up in Morehead, Kentucky for the first time at 18 years old. Daddy was still alive for about a year after that. And that's when I started going to jail. Back in Knox County, my first cousin was the county attorney. My grandmother had taught school for 36 years. My grandfather had run a furniture store, helped build the county's first hospital, so on and so forth. If, you're from a rural place, you might know personally or know somebody who's similar. And so I never got in trouble down there. People looked the other way. People figured I'd straighten up. Well, nobody knew me up here. And so, God, I hadn't been in town a month and a half and went to jail for the first time. And it was scary. Jail's a scary place. And then my daddy died when I was 19. He finished drinking himself to death. That was real heartbreaking for me. And, it just went on. It just went on and on like that till I was 24. And, I had been exposed to some recovery programming and some recovery ideas along the way, but I was just obsessed with this idea that somehow, some way, I was going to figure my way out of it on my own, that I was smart enough or I had enough willpower or, was just going to be motivated enough. Meanwhile, just dream after dream is being stripped from my life or I'm selling it to, continue. And I was in an apartment in Louisville, Kentucky. The size of a closet is infested with bed bugs. And I was laying there one afternoon, and the reality hit me like a ton of bricks that my life was going to progress in one of three directions. Either I would die in some sort of accident or violent confrontation, or I would finally get up the nerve to take my own life, or three, and this was the worst of all, I'd end up just like my daddy, and this would go on for another 20 plus years of just drinking until it finally took my body. And not long after that, came back to Rowan County for court, and on July the 18th, 2014, they said, remand Mr. Detherage into custody. And then on September the 4th, I was released from the detention center to go to the Morehead Inspiration Center program that we used to have here in the community, started by former Governor Fletcher. And the guy that picked me up from the jail was a guy that I had known a couple years prior when he was a client at the center. And then when they got me there, the guy that did an intake was somebody that had gone through from him. So my first two immediate experiences were people that I had known as clients in that program that were now staff members of that program. Gave me a tremendous amount of hope. I lived there for 13 months because that was the way that that program was designed. It wasn't a 30-day program. It wasn't a 6-month program. You stayed until you felt prepared to leave. And, you know, their program design, they have a curriculum out of Arkansas. It is a 12 steps based program, so it's not for everybody, but it was the right thing for me. That plus the modified therapeutic community model, I would go into that room with 40 other men 3 times a week, and we would talk to each other in a circle of love and accountability about our defects of character and, you know, practice some level of behavioral modification. I needed behavioral modification. I did. That's part of my story. My mind had to be rebuilt. There were so many pathways and decision-making apparatuses in my brain that were set up wrong that had to be worked on, and that program did that for me. They offered me employment when I was done, and then I got to go back to school. Went back here to Morehead to finish my bachelor's degree. Got me old bachelor's in university studies. But I primarily studied government and philosophy. And, you know, my entire story is a story of other people that chose to invest in me. Because for a long time, people saw something in me that I was not capable of seeing in myself. And while I was at school, you know, the counseling center got a grant. We tried to start a collegiate recovery program. And that was kind of the very genesis of my advocacy work. And then I got to go to Grayson when Pathways opened another recovery center. I served as the housing specialist there, and then a couple people from the Fletcher Group came by, and they found me to be talented, and I got to go work for former Governor Fletcher at the outfit that he had put together. And for me, that was a really tender and special moment because, you know, he did that work between 2004 and 2008, and fortunately that work was continued by subsequent administrations all the way up until the current administration. And that program literally saved my life. The Commonwealth of Kentucky saved my life. You know, when I speak at recovery fellowships, one of the quips I like to make is sometimes G-O-D is spelled D-O-C. And, you know, for me, something like 50% of the men and women that I went to high school with in Knox County, we had a graduating class of 198 individuals in 2008, and something like 50% of them are dead or incarcerated. I can tell, you know, generally the ages of most of y'all here in the room. We were decimated. The death toll of the opioid epidemic in the United States of America is greater than the sum total of every single combat death for every single war from the Revolutionary War through today. over the course of roughly 20 years. If it happened to any other group of people, it'd be called a genocide. And so for me, the mission is sacred. The work is sacred. They're my people. Not only of this place, but of this illness. Misunderstood, often hated. And don't get me wrong, we're miserable, awful people when we're out there. I was. And we hurt, and hurt people hurt people. One of my greatest mentors, he taught me that in this thing, because the recovery advocacy movement has really kind of been going on since about the mid-'70s. You know, he reminds me often that we stand on the shoulders of giants and the bones of those that didn't make it. And I try and not ever forget that. The work has taken me to a lot of interesting and cool places. It has. I got to assist Representative Adam Boeing and now Commissioner Schell when he worked for Senator McConnell's office with the legislation that established the Recovery Ready Communities Initiative, which I know there's a question about later. I got to serve as the president of the Kentucky Recovery Housing Network's advisory board as the Commonwealth sought to develop a NAR affiliate so that we could expand recovery housing in this state. You know, that was part of my story too. We used to have a member of this community, she's since passed, named Gene Scott. She had an apartment complex right across from the police station. She was the only person in town that would rent to the boys coming from MIC, and it was affordable. It wasn't a formal recovery house, but it gave you a shot to get started. I was forced to move out by probation and parole because there were 2 locked doors. And again, if not for community, another member of our community, a guy named Paul Blair, who's also since recently passed, he short-term leased me an apartment. Otherwise, I'd have been homeless again, starting over. And that community aspect is just critical. But, you know, I got to work with Kentucky League of Cities and the state legislature to pass the state's recovery housing law. This past year and a half, I've served as NAR's National Advocacy Chair for Recovery Housing. And next month, I've been called to Washington. I'm gonna go meet with a SAMHSA technical assistance panel to address this national issue that we have of fraud in recovery housing. You know, there's a flip side. Policy's a risky game because there's always unintended consequences, and it does not matter how carefully you craft the policy. And so while we have done a tremendous job expanding treatment access, on the back end of that has been a great deal of predatory, often aggressively predatory behavior, which I take personally because it is my people. We're not your paycheck. We're human beings. And so, again, I'm privileged and honored to be with you today, and you got me misty on your story. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take the spirit stick back now. I have a couple of general questions. I have a couple of pointed questions that I want to ask you all. But one thing that keeps coming up is this need for 2 things I've noticed is housing. And that's not just one thing. We're talking about different levels and situations in housing, and also how to relearn roles that when you're in kind of that state of dysfunction that you don't know how to be a daughter or a sister or a parent. And particularly, Kristin, I wanted to talk to you about your program that is relatively new that addresses fatherhood in the community. And then I'm going to have you pass it over to Logan and have him talk about that too.
Okay, so the Fletcher Group just recently received $500,000 of a opioid abatement research grant. We were one of 6 awardees, and what we are doing is we're studying what the elevation of fatherhood and recovery housing can do for individuals in recovery, dads. And it came about 2 years ago. I was working with Commonwealth Center for Fathers and Families with Recovery around County. We had gotten a mini grant, and I was learning more and more about dads and the importance of dads, and what happens with children when there aren't active dads, and all of that. And I had been a person who thought moms were the most important part, right? You know, and all of a sudden when I was in my active addiction, and I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, you know, we at the Fletcher Group aren't doing enough. We're not doing enough with dads in recovery housing. The nation's not doing enough with dads. You know, they're looked to often as the child support, and if you're not paying child support, you don't get to see, you know, it's just a very cut and dry kind of a thing. And so we got some money from Healing Appalachia. We were able to work with 4 recovery programs across the state and develop fatherhood programming, right? And what we call it elevating it fatherhood in the recovery houses. And we saw amazing results. The impact was crazy in dads, on their self-efficacy, their self-esteem, that being able to realize that I am worthy and I am important and I need to be a part of my children's lives. Because in active addiction, we back off. We're not being the best parents often, right? And so we feel it's better for our children if we aren't around them. And so then that divide gets greater and greater. So we learned a lot. One thing we learned was that we don't know a lot, right? And we learned, so we wrote this grant, the research grant, so that we could learn more of what different interventions need to take place. How do we best help recovery houses, recovery programs elevate fatherhood? And yeah, that's what we're doing. And we just kicked off July 1, and it's exciting as can be. Anyways.
I think we've been poached, Gene. Like all the treatments I went to and why I got the privilege to be blessed. I ran a roofing company for a long time, and I did really well. And I got the opportunity to open up a center, and so money doesn't have to be the forefront of it. And I think a lot of the times that's what it comes to, because why are these treatment centers making so much money, and the guys in there are eating trash food or going and doing this and not being taken to the gorge, to a cabin to stay when they get to that level, or Reds games or things like that, being a dad to them. Because if they don't ever get to see that, how do they know to act, you know? Love spelled time, T-I-M-E, you know? And it's being present. I'm not perfect. I've never been a dad before. I have to fumble through that, and I just get to show up. When I say I'm going to do something, I do it. When I'm wrong, I say, listen, I'm wrong. I would get asked, I have a 7-year-old little girl, and I'd treat her like she's 20. I explain to her, I talk to her like that, and I'll get asked, like, oh, she doesn't understand that. I said, one day she will. And like if I do that consistently now, there's no transition into baby talk to adult talk, you know. I'm not hard on them, I'm disciplined on them, but I show up, and in all these roles that I get to do, the most important thing is that I get to be home, or I get to see them anytime that I get to see them. The endeavors, the accolades, the things like that, like, don't matter if I don't have somebody to share it with. I told, whenever we started all this, I said, if this is going to, I watched this thing on TikTok. It's called School of Hard Knocks. And he asked these millionaires, and he's like, what's the one thing that you did? And he's like, oh, well, I wasn't there when my kid got up, and I wasn't there when my kid went to bed. And I was like, never. Like, I'm not doing that. The biggest part of it was to, whenever they get into that recovery housing, show that example, and like show them also, like them seeing me. Like, most of them know my children, you know. I don't drive my kid over to the recovery house and say, hey, babysit my kids, but like they see my kids with me performing everyday tasks and doing that and walking with them through that. And so like they'll get to see that and learn what that is. And the biggest stories that I get are when a guy finishes and he's like, Logan, I haven't talked to my kid in this long, and we're going out this, and we're doing this weekend, and I got him to do this, and it's all because of you. And I'm like, no, time out. Like, has nothing to do with me. The only thing that I did is open a door that you walked through. Like, I did this. You put the effort in. Don't do that, you know. And I think so many times in that it gets misplaced on where it should come from, because I heard a thing one time and it said, never tell your kids you're proud of them. Well, that sounds ludicrous. I'm going to tell my kid I'm proud of him. And I was like, well, where's the hook? Like, what's he going to say and what wordplay is he going to use? And it was this. He said, I always tell my kid you should be proud of yourself, because one day I'm going to be dead. One day I'm going to be gone. And now every bit of pride or accountability or the person he is relies on what I tell him. How do I get it so that he's comfortable in himself? So I blend that. I still tell him I'm proud of him. But I also say, you should be really proud of yourself. Like, look what you did. You know, that's to my son, he's 3. He'll be 4 soon. But like stewarding that, like I get to watch a guy, and I don't know if it's one of the organizations you work with, but I think it's called Kentucky Dads, right? Is that one of my buddies works with him. He's on a ESPN commercial that aired during the Super Bowl and through all these things. They're flying him down. They just flew him to Texas. They're flying him down to maybe Texas again for a seminar of like all dads, and like he's a speaker at the thing. He's like, I don't know what to do, you know, and like to be that example, to be present, realize we make mistakes, have the accountability, and show up. And so integrating that in, like the guys have a drug problem, they need to learn to deal with that. But they also have or me, like I have a me problem. I got to learn to get out of the way of that. Like once the drugs are gone, like, okay, now how do I live? And so introducing that into them, especially in the recovery housing phases, is integral for them to be self-reliant on themselves.
There was a mention of incarceration in multiple ways. It seems like it is complicated, to say the least. That, you know, you indicated that in some ways it was a bit of a savior, and in other cases it really, you know, complicated your ability to then sort of rejoin society when you were ready. And Melinda and I were talking yesterday, and Kristin, you worked directly with folks who were coming directly out of the system too. But Melinda, I want to pass it over to you, because I want to talk about maybe some of the ills before we get to some of the solutions. And I asked her really pointedly, you know, based on your lived experience, what would you change? You know, what are some of the ways that system is inextricable and complicates the recovery process? And what would you, as someone who is the expert on that in your lived experience, do differently?
You know, one of the hardest things, especially when I'm working with an individual who's been incarcerated, especially over a significant amount of time, is institutionalized. I know if I had not been incarcerated, probably the extent that I was incarcerated before I was sent to treatment, I may not have successfully completed treatment. Incarceration, in a way, for a certain amount of time, did kind of help clear my head, get the drugs out of my system, and let me take a real look at what my life and what I'd been doing. But with that, I was fortunate enough that the judge gave me the opportunity to go into a treatment facility. And I went to the treatment facility and I failed. I was, you know, of course, DOC was also part of my sentencing. And whenever I relapsed and stuff, I was honest with my probation officer, and again, she sent me back to treatment again. It took them 4 years of my sentence to get me on the right track. It wasn't that I didn't want to be on the right track. I didn't know how to be on the right track. I didn't have the right people in my life and support and stuff behind me. Working with individuals today, it's incarceration, it appears that, you know, there's been giving longer sentences. I work with individuals who've been incarcerated pretty much since they were 18 years old, who are now almost 40 years old, who have never been given an option for treatment, who have never been given an option for drug court, who have never been given an option for any kind of help whatsoever to help them change their lives around. So, you know, with the system and stuff, it's like I don't know how they expect a different result to happen. When I continue to incarcerate people for long periods of time, the only thing that I learned in jail was how to get more drugs and how to be a better criminal. That was all I learned. And it seems like today that, and it costs more to keep an individual incarcerated rather than give them treatment, but it seems like more are wanting to give more harsher sentences rather than to give an individual the mental health help that they need or the substance use treatment that these individuals need. What else was it?
No, I think you got it. I asked you, I said, as somebody who is working inside of that system, what would you like to see done differently?
I mean, what I'd like to see is that treatment be an option, especially for individuals who are really wanting to do something different with their life. Drug court, I work also with the drug court panel here in Round County, and this has been a really great experience of being able to help individuals and stuff navigate the drug court system and to learn how to live life on life's terms. I think another thing would, like the education to the judges and prosecutors and stuff, would also maybe be a great advantage to help them understand mental health and the disease of addiction. Because long, harsh sentences for trafficking substances or possessions of substances and stuff is not helping the problem. It just continues to repeat the problem.
Can I add something real quick? Trauma begins when a person is booked. When that first time that somebody gets PI or somebody gets a possession, misdemeanor type thing, but they're booked into the jail, they're kept overnight. So that sets off, now they have a record. Now their job opportunities have decreased. Now all of their life has changed dramatically from that moment, right? For something that is a disease, is a chronic disease that we treat as though it is often treated as though it is criminal. Anything that can be done to help divert that so that that doesn't happen. And there's some great programs that are happening that are working on where people aren't even where they're not even arrested. It's immediately, let's go get help, right? Let's not end up with that first misdemeanor. Let's get help first. That is a way. I'm not going to say that's the only way, but that is a big way of being able to help that whole thing so that people don't end up. The Recovery Kentucky Centers, the diversion process, that's an option. The judges say, okay, no, you have to do treatment instead of spending the time in jail. They've already done the booking and all of that, but it still gets them help, right? People are realizing that people need help, not to be locked up.
And then so talking about some of the ills or some of the failures of the system or whatever dysfunction of the system, I want to, you're mostly invited here today to talk about sort of Rowan County's model and the way that they were held up as an example of, sort of a good use of funds, and the ecosystem model that you described, Kristin. If you and Gene could talk a little bit about that and how that works in general and how it's being implemented here.
It's Gene's baby. Here. Okay. I just copied it.
Very briefly on the justice tip, the state of Oregon attempted decriminalization, which was a good idea. But does anybody know why it failed? Why it failed? I disagree. I disagree with John, actually. I think it failed because they also decriminalized all of petty property crime that went along with it. Personally, I don't think you can perpetrate justice by then forcing injustice onto other people. But that's my belief system because, yeah, it solved a big part of the drug war problem, but then, everybody's getting their stuff stole and they don't like it. But anyway, recovery-ready communities. So the original framework was developed by a guy named Robert Ashford, who's kind of gone on out of academia into private industry. But, he he kind of theorized, so the most difficult thing about solving substance use disorder is it doesn't belong to any one sector of government or any one sector of society. It has all of these intersections. There's intersections with public health. There's intersections with the hospital system, with law enforcement, with criminal justice, with employment. And, all of these systems work in their own capacity. And not all problems, but a lot of types of problems can be solved by singular systems. So anyway, what Recovery Ready Communities does is it provides a framework to map what the necessary assets are in a community to, theoretically increase the likelihood that more individuals are going to recover long-term from substance use disorders. So you start with the mapping process. And then following that, you try and make them actually work together, and that's actually the hardest part. I don't know. I've been doing this work for almost a decade now, and it's really hard to get nonprofits to work together. I really don't know how else to put it. There's been a lot of improvement over the years, but, especially for Eastern Kentucky, such a significant part of our economy is publicly funded, whether that's directly or indirectly, whether that's direct benefits to individuals that are living in poverty, or it's grants programs that flow into state or local government, or the nonprofit system. And so you end up with this kind of competition between nonprofits that forces them into these financial positions where they can't be true to their mission, whatever they say their mission is. Because the second you start a nonprofit, you're obligated to its survival. And oftentimes that becomes the primary mission, is making sure the nonprofit survives rather than executing on the mission that it was created to solve. And so you end up having to try and get people together and convince them that it's actually in their best interest to be collaborative and to not try and be all things to all people. And in that, you try and build the connective tissue that makes a recovery ecosystem functional. And so our primary attempt with that was, we co-founded Recovery Round County purely on the idea that, because we know we're like insiders, all four of us. If somebody goes through treatment or they're leaving incarceration and maybe they got services while they were incarcerated, maybe they didn't, and then they're just back out in the wild, maybe without housing and a lot of other basic needs that people have to rebuild a life. How to open a bank account. There's any number of things. But, a lot of times these places don't want to work together, or they don't know about each other. And the part that frustrates me the most is if you accept the premise that the individual with the substance use disorder is a sick person, you're then putting the sick person in a position where they then have to navigate all kinds of bureaucracy that they just don't know how to navigate, because our nonprofit and public sector systems are built for middle class, literate, at minimum high school graduated people. And when you're talking about the Medicaid population or the jail population, that's not who you're dealing with. And then, the people operating these programs get frustrated with them when they don't know how to do it, or society looks at them when they fail because there was no way they could know about the resources or be able to navigate the resources. And so our attempt to solve that problem was to create a place that was ran by peers that, was basically just a clearinghouse for individuals. Don't do something new. There's plenty of money that flows into things for services, Medicaid, SNAP, child care assistance, public education. There's tons and tons and tons of resources. If you've never looked at the state budget, it's available online for free, or you've never looked at the federal budget, please do. There's so much money that goes out there, and a lot of it doesn't even get spent. But the problem is the individual's ability to navigate in and amongst those systems effectively. And so that's what we try and solve. And I'm glad that we got commended for it. That's great.
And real quick here, a part of all of that work led to us, Harry Clark inviting Fletcher Group and Gene to bring together all of the people, all the stakeholders in Morehead, all the stakeholders, all of the treatment, all of the recovery housing, all of the city, county, EMS, first responders, to come together and talk about recovery, right? We had done it pre-COVID. We had gotten some things taken and then, that were going on, and then COVID hit and it disbanded. So we wanted to bring it back together. And so we did, and we had 40-something people the first time and almost the same number the second time we met, which was pretty impressive that they all came back, right? And we did a SWOT analysis, and we identified what the priorities needed to be for our area, for our Round County, Morehead. Communication amongst providers was the number one, right? Like Gene was talking about. But you know what? That group meeting did wonders for that. I'm not going to call it, different providers were talking to each other, So from that, then these pillars are developed, and that's prevention, harm reduction, risk reduction, treatment and recovery. And so there are committees, right, that are made up of individuals that work in those spaces that then will take those priorities, take that SWOT analysis that we did as a whole, do it within their group, and develop goals and strategies, priorities amongst each pillar to help address those. That will then drive, that information is monthly reported out at the ASAP Unite board meetings, which then on a quarterly basis is reported out to leadership in county and city government, which will drive how opioid abatement funds will be used in this community. That's the beautiful part of it, right? Is that as a community, we're coming together and saying, here's where the needs are, here's some suggestions for doing it, fixing it. Now, here's the money to do that.
And super briefly, it solves a huge problem for the elected officials. They have to worry about everything in a community: the roads, the water, the electricity, the parks, the social events, and literally everything in between. And that's true for both your county and your city governments. You cannot reasonably expect them to become experts in prevention, harm reduction, treatment, and recovery. So what this system is designed to do is to solve the information problem for them, because they know a lot of these people and they know these other institutions. And so if those institutions are coming to them with a unified voice and a unified plan on how to solve some of these issues, that is a trustworthy source of information for them to make funding decisions. And that's the whole point of it, is to format that information in a way that is digestible, understandable, and actionable for them, rather than simply looking to them and expecting them to make good decisions, because they rely on us. That's why we elect them.
And then this wouldn't be this group if I didn't ask this one last follow-up question, and then I'm going over time because I can't stop myself. A wise person told me earlier today that the folks that are closest to the problems are also closest to the solution, but a lot of times they're the furthest away from the resources and the power. And so when you all were talking about your bringing stakeholders to the table, I heard, EMS, I heard providers, I heard this and that. I'd like to know, in your work, and this can be a question for everybody here, how do you make sure that when you're advocating that those voices of the folks that are actually in recovery are represented in what you do?
I think all of that is really kind of like exactly what they formulated. And I think it started and drifted up. And here in Round County, where we have an abundance of treatment, different options, inpatient, outpatient, things like that. This person hates this person, and this person hates this person, and it's still like a small city or a small county. So it spreads, and every entity thinks they have to work on their own, and like sometimes putting those resentments or that pride aside and just being like, hey, I don't care what we think of each other, let's help this person. Sometimes that happens and sometimes that doesn't, and I really look forward to like watching this be birthed and going on, because I think that is the solution, and then how we deal with it. Other than that, like for you all, it's if you have somebody suffering of this, the tough love and the community and being there for somebody, but not maybe financially or this and that, like helping those people or persons through their walk in recovery and finding the right resources to it, because a lot of it's just, again, community in it and acceptance of them and watching them go that out without the enabling,
Working for a nonprofit and stuff, sometimes, I hear the negative feedback from people and their conversations and stuff. But I also work with the First Day Forward program, which is like a reentry program. And I have to place this person where I see that their needs are going to be best met. And advocating for these people, talking to attorneys, talking to judges, reaching out to Round Recovery, reaching out to other entities and stuff to help my person to get to where it is, is very important in order to help that individual to achieve what they want to achieve in their life.
How do we advocate? How do we bring, I think, like the community group, the ecosystem pillars, probably 75% of the individuals, 80% of the individuals on those groups have lived experience. So there's one voice, right? Is listening to the individuals with lived experience that are also in the field, right? And then, but then also making sure that we're listening to the peers that just started, that are brand new into the field, right? That are, don't have 10 years, don't have, that are just now beginning in this area, so that we're making sure that it's not the quote unquote professional folks in recovery that are being listened to and that are making the decisions, that it is the everybody from the ground up that is being able to be involved. And just in the little bit that I've seen of our pillars, I've watched individuals like that take on responsibilities that they've grown from, right? And you can see having to have some leadership, having to have some responsibility, the wonders that it does for a human being, right? And then they are able to pass that on to the next.
For me, advocacy is very much a team sport. I mean, John Bowman, Billy O'Brien, Tara Hyde, all our grandma, Amanda Hall. She was the first of us, and there's a lot of other people. It's not a solo venture. And, for me personally, in my approach, my first responsibility is to find out what is working in other places, not reinvent the wheel, and then try and make that actionable in the communities and the places that I serve. The idea for the pillar thing came from Hamilton County, Ohio. They've been doing it, that's Cincinnati. They've been doing it for like 2 or 3 years, and they have 140 organizations that meet on a quarterly basis. And, for each domain that they're focused on, they elect chairs and co-chairs to be representative of the larger component of that nonprofit, public, and sometimes private partner sector within their community. And so it looked like it would work there, and, so why wouldn't it work here or in Franklin County or in Richmond? And then, beyond that, it's just, it's service above self. I'm there as a facilitator for the people that I represent. And, you know, I try and keep that at the forefront. I get to be the one in the room a lot of the times, you know, because I work really hard at it to an unhealthy extent, honestly. But, you know, I'm only as good as the information that I'm bringing in. So, like, if I'm not having conversations with John, or I'm not having conversations with Tara Hyde or Kristin or Logan or other members of the community, like if I'm not actually aware of what is actually going on, I'm of no use in that room. It's a hard thread to weave. I mean, you know, you got to keep a lot of stuff in your head, but it is fun and adventuresome.
We're already over time, but I'm going to use my executive authority to at least get 2 questions from the audience out here. I knew it. No, it's okay. Here, take it. I want it because we're recording. Also, John's the one that told me that quote this morning.
Yeah, that was from Glenn Martin. So my question's for all you guys. Since you're in recovery, you probably know the SAMHSA definition of recovery, you know, a process of change in which an individual improves their health and wellness, lives a self-directed life. My question for you is, what is your definition of recovery? What does recovery mean to you?
When I think of it, it's a completely personalized definition. It's not going to be one that's going to go for everybody. But legacy. So, like, very briefly, I'll try to tell a story. I used to have a landscaping company, and I go to Lowe's, and at Lowe's, my guys knew if someone needed help loading something up, load it up. Like, I know we're not getting paid. Everybody's paid. Do the work. Help them. Help people. And one day I was doing that, and the guy asked me, he said, who are you? You work here? I was like, no, sir, my name's Logan Barker. You know, we're just helping out, you know. He said, are you any kin to John D. Barker? Now, that was my granddad who died 10 years ago, when he died, he was 92 years old. And so this was an older man. He said, let me tell you a story. He said, we were cutting tobacco one time. The rain was coming in. My dad wanted to get it up, and he said, your granddad stopped to sell me insurance, or sell my dad insurance. He said, I was just a kid. He said, my dad was a hateful man. And he said, now, John, leave us alone. Like, we've got stuff to do. We've got to get up, and nice to meet you. I appreciate it. We got to get this up. Like, we don't got time to talk. He said, your granddad went back to his car, took his suit jacket off, put his boots on, and cut tobacco with us the rest of the day. He said, that's the kind of bloodline you got. And what recovery has afforded to me, and what I get to do with that, is create that legacy. So whenever my son or my little girl get to hear that story, so because of recovery, I get that. So that's why I said it's kind of a personalized response, but that's what it means to me.
You know, recovery to me is being able to successfully navigate life, to be able to be responsible, to be able to be a mother, to be able to be a daughter, to be able to take care of my children. Recovery, I know, is a complete different definition for everybody, but I have seen many people who maybe uses a MOUD program or Suboxone. If that sustains that person, that they can successfully navigate through life, that is recovery. You know, I have seen multiple people who may use marijuana. If that person can successfully navigate life and do what they need to do with their life and be successful, then that is recovery. You know, recovery for me had complete abstinence and substance free. But I have seen many different definitions of recovery since I have been working with so many different individuals.
Thank you, guys. So personal as well, you know, there's many pathways. And the longer I've been able to work with Recovery around county and in the job that I have currently, the more I understand that and become accepting and open-minded to all of that. But for me personally, recovery is freedom from the guilt, shame, and remorse that I had prior to recovery, and the freedom to be myself and to be that person that I always wanted to be but couldn't. because of my substance use disorder. Now, however individuals can get to that place, right, is them. Mine, like, is an abstinence-based program. I can't do anything, or I will be doing everything. That's all.
For me personally, it's largely summed up in the word responsibility. The freedom to be responsible is probably the best. Responsible to myself for my own actions and my own conduct, past, present, and future. Responsibility to my family, responsibility to my community, responsibility to my state, responsibility to my country, responsibility to my world. Whatever circle or level life is bringing to me in that moment. There's a quote, and I'm going to get it wrong. It's attributed to Osho, who I'm not sure who is, but I really like the quote. It's something along the lines of, to be responsible is to be free. To give the first responsibility to another is to make oneself a slave. And I think about that a lot. Recovery gave me back my ability to be a complete human being, and then what I do with that is solely and entirely up to me.
Hold on, we got a line at the pulpit here.
No,
So.
I just wanted you guys to know the reason I asked that question as someone long-term in recovery. I want you guys to realize that recovery is different for everyone. There is no blanket definition for everyone. We all have a different definition of recovery and what it means to us. So that's the only reason I asked that question. I want you guys to see that.
Thanks, John. I think that was a great follow-up. Yes. All right, hold on. Do you two have questions? Is that why you're sitting here? All right, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yep. These two, yeah, you all. For one-on-ones. All right.
Okay. Thank you. Yep. All right, I'm going to see if I can say this. I'm Casey. I'm a peer support specialist. I just wanted to know is there anybody that you all know that is openly in recovery that works for the state, specifically in Frankfort or any of your local governments?
Well, I just want to make sure, It seemed like the obvious choice.
Judge Michael Mueller, Judge Executive Michael Mueller, Judge Executive Franklin County, he shares openly about his journey in recovery. Mr. Brandon Fitch, who works at the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. I can't remember what all he's overseeing now. I know he works with the RCOs and stuff, but he lives openly in recovery. That's the two that jump. I mean, at the federal level, there's a gentleman named Mr. Klobuchar. He was brought back into SAMHSA. He has lived experience, and he's working at SAMHSA. There have been several former federal stuff. Patrick Kennedy, of course, the current Secretary of HHS, Robert Kennedy, acknowledges being in recovery. And there have been, if you've never checked out Faces and Voices of Recovery, they've kind of got like a Hall of Fame and a list. Who was the astronaut who was in recovery from alcoholism? But was it Buzz Aldrin? There was an astronaut, one of the guys that went to the moon. They testified. Yeah, well, they testified in front of Congress about being in recovery. We can literally go.
Okay. So, Becky, person in long-term recovery, DJ Ramblin' Rose. I guess my question is, so I'm a person in long-term recovery, and I know that my almost 8 years of time in recovery spaces. Like I have, the game's not the same, right? The environment is not the same. Like when I was buying oxys on the street, I could be sure it was an oxy on the street, right? Like, so I know that the game's not the same. So I know that a person just entering recovery or a person who is attempting their own form of recovery that may not be full abstinence, right? Like, I know that these people are out there, right? And they know more than I do about it. They know more about the streets than I do now. What specific spaces are you making in your work for people who are directly impacted and are not, as far as we are, away from the problem? Like, what specifically what spaces are you making so that people who are still actively using or are in very early recovery have the autonomy to make the choices about their recovery? Like, what specific seat at the table are you providing for those folks?
Recovery Grand County is, I mean, that's for those individuals. You know, it's a community, it's a recovery community center where anybody and everybody can come to charge their phone, to get a cup of coffee, to get warm because they've spent the night in a tent, to do whatever is necessary just to find some community and resources at whatever level that might be and wherever that might be. So there are some places in Morehead that provide for that space. The Welcome House, you know, we have a number of different organizations that work providing space for that individuals that are brand new. And then like Logan is working it, you know, right on with individuals brand new in recovery. I mean, I think all of us touch that population. That's not what you're asking though. So, you know, with the Recovery Community Organization, they're being guided. They're being able to make their own, their decisions about their recovery, what that means, what that looks like, how that plays out. Now, as far as being able to then impact what is going on as far as with the community ecosystem pillars, the peers that are a part of the community organization, the community center, they are on those pillars. So they're taking, they're working firsthand with those individuals, and then they're bringing that knowledge to the pillars to be able to provide input from where they, what needs to take place.
I hear and understand the question, and I'll be completely honest with you. He mentioned the fellow that's got on the ESPN commercial and went to Texas. That guy's name is Zach. I'm not going to use his last name without his permission. But like in my role with Recovery Round County, like we got a mini grant, like he went through the thing, and now he's going on to do all the things that he's doing. And so, for me, myself personally, 12 years in, I am a long, long way from what my experience was, and the environment is different. At the same time, I am in a lot of spaces where I am able to be representative of that community. And so I do my best to stay informed of the reality on the ground. But there's not going to be somebody 2 days or like actively detoxing. There's not a great way to take them to a legislative committee table with me or to a private meeting where policy discussions are being made. Why? I'm of two minds about it, and I'll be honest with you and the audience. I don't think that is a healthy or good thing to do to that person in the first place. I think the magnitude of their health conditions and almost certainly their state of mind and the things that they're dealing with, I think that would be possibly to the degree of cruel to do to them. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's a fair comparison. I don't. I think that untreated substance use disorder is largely characterized by a lot of trauma, poverty, oftentimes untreated mental illness, whether that's severe or light. I don't think that people need to be babied, and I think that we do need mechanisms to receive that feedback and that experience. I just think it needs to be done in a considerate and actionable way. And I personally don't necessarily think throwing somebody who's actively detoxing in front of a bunch of state legislators on Kentucky entertainment television is going to be effective for the policy or the individual.
I think that this is really important, and I think well over time. And no, ma'am, no, we asked questions. We brought people here because you bring a unique perspective, and he brings a unique perspective as well. And we've heard both of you, and you're both right, and you're both two truths can be happen at the same time, right? We never promise you comfort here. We promise you to support you in your discomfort, right? And give you the opportunity to say what you want to say. Having said that, let's transition into some coffee and some healing and some one-on-one conversations. And I want to thank you all so much for being open, honest, vulnerable, letting these folks ask you questions. Let me ask you questions and getting to know you. I want to thank you for saying the hard things, and I also want to thank you all for listening with open hearts and being receptive to this. I know, again, it's not an easy conversation. Again, I'm getting choked up. This is not even my story. So, thanks.